1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. As usual, I am your host, Joe Mahaffey, getting it right the second time.
And I'm James Engelhardt, your co-host over here.
So,
not having to worry about anything, right? Thank you for carrying that mantle.
No worries, man. It's just, again, if the minute I take my eyes off of it is when I just want to just go over the place. So this one, folks, is a false start in many respects, because when we got together a couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to have an interview with Dan Halligan of Killinta Games, the publisher of Obsession and all of its various add-ons, and we had a little bit of technical challenges getting into that interview. And so what I wanted to do is just sort of take this time to say how much we appreciated our time with Dan, and we are going to play that interview for you now. So as many of you know, here on Lay It on the Table, we were periodically able to have some guests, and guests in the past have included game designers like Jamie Stegmaier and authors like Megan Cannell. And today we are so lucky to be speaking with Dan Halligan. Dan is a game designer and I should know.
And author, as for that matter.
And I guess you pronounce it Killinta Games. How would you say that, Dan? I'm sure I'm messing that up and you're cringing for getting it wrong.
You've got it, Killinta Games, and that sometimes creates some confusion because there's a city in Arizona named Killinta.
Okay.
So I just got something in an email where a lady said, I don't live far from Killinta, but I was naming it after where I'm moving in about 5 months, which is out to St. George, Utah, north of there.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a art community called Killinta, and that's what I named it after, because that's where I'm going to be for the rest of my days. So I figured I would, looking forward, I would name it after that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Awesome, yeah.
So just a little bit of a backstory and how we got Dan to come on the show. So back at the beginning of the pandemic, literally the beginning of the pandemic, I found a game. Let me fix my focus here. I found a game on, I guess it was a Kickstarter page that was in like late pledges, or maybe it just missed into late pledges. And the game is called Obsession, and it's a game sort of about a Jane Austen era type of group. And my wife, the English major herself, always loved Jane Austen. And so I was like, wow, this is a perfect game. Her birthday's coming up. Her birthday's in April. If I can get a hold of this game and be the hero for the birthday, that'll be great. And so I reached out to Dan and said, is it too late to get in on this? And he was kind enough to say, nope, it's not too late. Go ahead. And then he said, I told him about the birthday, and he goes, well, I can't guarantee it, but we'll try. I think you should be okay. And then obviously the world continued to spiral as the pandemic heated up in our life. For those of you who remember the first quarter of 2020 and just sort of how that was just a daily descent into madness. And Dan did something that was pretty amazing. He sent me an email proactively and said, hey, Joe, I just want you to know that with what's going on in the world with distribution and such, and games and people's jobs and all this stuff, I can't guarantee anything by your wife's birthday. And I was like, totally cool with that. So grateful. I was just so impressed at the level of attention to detail. And so I was able to score a copy of the Tang Garden game that had just come out around that same time to cover the birthday. And then Obsession finally got here. I guess it was later in the fall, maybe. I'm trying to remember now, Dan.
Yeah, fulfillment started in September.
Yeah,
when that started to hit.
Yeah, so this was the second edition, by the way, because I believe Obsession was originally released in 2018 or so, and that this was a reprint along with some expansions that included the upstairs, downstairs, etc.
Yeah, 2018 was the first crack, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And one of the things I did not do as a wannabe game designer was to thoroughly play test the product. I had my groups, and that was it. I never really solicited people on the outside, never found those people who have that sort of game breaking intellect where, you know, you've ever been driving along and you see everybody turning down a shortcut, turning down a road, and you're wondering why they're going down there. And then one day you turn down, you realize, oh my gosh, I cut off 5 minutes to get to the gym or something like that. And that's what people who break games do. They look at game mechanics and they intuitively say, well, I can do this, 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 and this. And I didn't do that, just had my group. And so really my play testing was the first edition of the second edition. The people who bought the first edition were my large play testing audience.
Right.
And then I incorporated that information into the second edition. So that's one of the reasons when I run into a first edition owner, I'm really grateful to them because they serve that dual capacity. And I try to make sure I upgrade them, get them some of the new features like the numbering system for the tiles, some of the rebalancing of the decks and things like that. So, and then in 2020 was the fulfillment of the 2019 Kickstarter that did those revisions from the first edition to the second.
So for the uninitiated, Obsession is a board game that takes place in the Jane Austen era. You're playing.
No, it's a little later than that.
Well,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's quite all right.
The reason is that this is for experts like your wife. This is the kind of hotly contested thing that comes up. There is what I call the British aristocratic period, which is from the Romantic period at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, all the way to about World War I and a little bit thereafter. It's about 120 years.
The long 19th century.
Yeah. So
what's that?
The long 19th century.
Exactly. And we have the Romantic period, which goes up to Queen Victoria. And then we have Queen Victoria from 1840 to 1902. They really know how to do queens that last a long time. And then we get into the Edwardian period and such. And all of that was the heyday. And then the Industrial Revolution causing the decline of the aristocratic life and into sort of the World War I and the global events there, sort of really ending that as something except a nostalgia. So we're set in 1862. I answer questions in the long form. We're set in 1862.
So right in the middle of the Victorian era.
You got it.
Okay. I in my brain, because I remember our original attraction to it was just that whole motif. And so you're playing a particular family and you're trying to up your station so that someone in your family can ultimately be paired with the family that you want to pair with. So it's done really well. We've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of the base game Obsession second edition. And then we've applied now the upstairs, downstairs, and all the different expansions. And so my wife and I will generally play it with the upstairs, downstairs components where you get more servants to work with, which are meeples that you can use that sort of enhance your abilities in the game that kind of help you get to the points system that you want to be the desired family to join with at the end of the game. And so it's been a lot of fun learning the game. It's one of our favorites. And so, and by the way, to my knowledge, it is one of the few games on the planet that is part of a collection of games owned by a member of the New Zealand Parliament, and that it's in the TEFI 25. If you were familiar with for those of you who are familiar with the YouTuber 3 Minute Board Games, his wife, who happens to be a member of the New Zealand Parliament, is one of the ways that we learned this game, because she does an amazing video where she guffaws over it. And we just learned our initial understanding of the game was through her. And so I always like to call that out as something somewhat distinctive about the game.
Yeah, they were one of the first to the original edition to get to sort of broadcast it.
And I think I don't have the back cover that you actually put their logo on the back cover of the second edition because you got a gold medal from them, I believe.
I did. I think that they started giving out gold medals, and I got a few awards. I didn't get like big awards or anything, but the gold medal looked darn good, and they're a popular reviewer. They also are a reviewer that has some independence. They will say thumbs down. They will say thumbs up. They don't take compensation for when they review. So I was impressed by all that, and that video she did was so flattering. I said, I'm gonna do something.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I think you talked a little bit about it with the independence piece, because that's the other thing I've noticed in the interactions that you and I have had. It's been over my wife's birthday. There was an issue that one of the meeples in the set we got was actually cut in half. Literally, I got like half a footman, and you were not only kind enough to replace the footman, you sent me a whole box of additional meeples. So I actually have extras in the game, which is kind of neat, because this is the customer service is kind of what I'm driving at there. And then I think you partnered with the guy, I believe it's Shipshape
Gamer. Yeah.
Yeah. The insert. I have his insert, and it's just, I love inserts that help you get the game out onto the table quickly. And the way you guys put that together is just really even made the game much more accessible from my standpoint. But I do have I have a couple of questions, and I know that James is going to have some questions too. One of the things that I love about the game is, we on this channel, we talk a lot about the games and the artists that are involved in the game. And a lot of your art is the pictures of the cards, these people. And I'm not doing a really good job with the focusing here with the camera here, but like, here's one. My wife loves this one. She loves it when we get this person in the group, because the name is Miss Constance Smokey, the kind and social Miss Stuckey. Stuckey, I can see that.
Stuckey,
Hails from Bakewell and is sought after whist partner. And my wife thinks this looks like a meme from somewhere on the internet. But I'm just kind of curious with these pictures. Are these like friends of yours that y'all all dressed up, or did you find these historically? How did you come up with all the pictures that are on the cards?
So go back to the wannabe game designer stage. Whenever a lot of people in our hobby are so enthralled by the hobby, and they have ideas that they want to roll up their sleeves and make a game. Mm-hmm. And the expectation, certainly my expectation, was going to be a little boutique game that I'd make a few hundred and then I'd move on. I had a full-time job, and it was, I grew up back in the 70s where I was the dungeon master for my group. We played Dungeons and Dragons, and I never was a character. I always would create. So it was I said, and so when you're doing that, you're up against a catch-22, which is that if you don't have good art in your game, you're going to basically broadcast that you're an amateur. And if you broadcast that you're an amateur, you're not going to have the money to put good art in the game. And art is very expensive. I know now because I actually have a game that's in development for 2024 where I'm getting large numbers of hand painted artwork done. It's actually going to be in the same universe. So, if you've seen the castle that's on the expansion that I'm coming up with, it's on the front box. I don't know if you've seen that on Board Game Geek or on a Facebook page, but that's his work. So I'm not going to invest. Think about it. Really, that's 100 characters. If I had those hand painted and a 19th century style, for a boutique game, it wouldn't do that. So I worked in the patent office a long time ago, not the patent office, but a company that did microfilming before there was digital. patents would issue, and we'd microfilm them. And I knew that everything before 1929, all photographs before 1929 were in the public domain.
Sure.
And so I started investigating just what does the internet have to offer as far as authentic 19th century photographs. Well, my original game design, like you and your wife like, was going to be a Regency game. It was going to be pre-industrial revolution, but the camera wasn't invented until about 25 years, very primitive. And, that was where you had those Victorian photos where everybody had to stay still for like a 4-minute exposure. And they looked like they were, wax, animations. The pictures are wax figures. And so I moved it from 1820s to 1860s because in 1860, they started to get more widespread use of cameras. And so I took real photographs for people in 1860, and it pushes all the way up to 1880s, 1890s. Sure. You can tell because I've had a few costuming experts who will say, no. They didn't have a bowler back in 1860. It was a flat top. And I've got people with bowlers on their heads. So I have a little artistic license there, a poetic license, if you will.
So that's interesting because I'm always curious, how that undertaking may happen for you, and that makes a ton of sense. I mean, when you're bootstrapping a game as an independent designer, and you were designing this, you were basically publishing it yourself. You didn't really have, when we talked to Jamie Stegmaier, I mean, he's got this infrastructure that's been in place now with Stonemaier Games. We've talked to other folks that are able to work with people like AEG and stuff like that, and so. They've got a little bit more networks and stuff in their midst. So I was always curious how you set that up. I also love the fact that there's this card, and again, this is the detective himself, Sherlock Holmes, makes an appearance in the game. Now, I don't know if this picture is from an Arthur Conan Doyle type of setup or something like that, but I thought, were you able to include that for the same reason because of the statutes of limitation on his work?
That's just a picture of a likely Holmes looking young man. Holmes would have been very young, probably too young for the time of our game by about 5-6 years. He was alive in 1862, but I think he was probably a teenager.
Steven Spielberg already did that with the young Sherlock Holmes.
Oh yeah.
So that's just it. All the pictures don't in any way connect to the language, to the names, or to the flavor text.
Well, that's true except for one, and that would be Duchess Lilo the cat. Is my wife's favorite card in the whole deck.
Come here. Well, this is Duchess Lilo, who came in to give.
Oh, hi there.
Who came in to give a kiss a little while ago.
Oh, so she's a pretty girl.
He doesn't know she's famous. I've got Duchess Lilo pins, Duchess Lilo framed artwork. Not me. People have done. But.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so
she's a pretty girl. That's a sweet cat.
Yeah, it's a Bengal, and
yep,
she's a trip.
That's awesome.
Do you want to know this? I don't know if you know the story on why it's in there.
No,
I don't. So please tell us.
Lay it on me. Yeah,
I'll do it quickly. So there's cat people and dog people, and I've always been. It's not quite backing up a little.
So,
keep telling it. I can insert it later as a graphic about.
And so just in general, I would be filming things during the Kickstarter in 2020, the one you just missed, saying this is the solo mode. And I have multiple cats in here. My cats would jump up on the table, and then the dog people would, the cat people would, get all excited. Oh, what kind of cat is it? And the dog people would say, enough with the damn cats. Just get the cats out. Just stick to the game. So we got in this friendly war between dog owners and cat owners. And and I won, dropped the mic because I didn't tell anybody about that card, and I sent it out to all 5,000 people who got that game after the Kickstarter, and they opened it up and found it in there, and the dog people had no line, had no forum to come back and try to argue anymore. I won. Made her the most reputable guest in the game.
That's funny. I mean, we always enjoy having her in the game, and we keep her in there. So, and I know I really am not going to monopolize the entire conversation. I do want James to jump in here, but I am curious about one thing because I know that, obviously I have a copy of the game. I know one other couple in my area that has a copy of the game. Some folks have talked to the owner of a local game store here, Carolina Tabletop Games. And I think it's difficult for some of the independent game resellers to get the game. Is that something you're looking to fix with any kind of distribution, or is just Amazon pretty much it and any aftermarket?
So I'm looking right here at my list of game stores because I very eagerly support game stores, but North Carolina only have one, which is weird. I have 4 in Georgia. And,
sure.
There it is, Game Theory in Raleigh.
Okay.
So and that's one.
And to be fair, I think he may have reached out to you early on before you had something set up. Because do you distribute through a distributor, or do you just do direct with the
So this is somewhat of a layered situation. So it's tough as an independent designer,
sure,
to make a good profit when distributors get involved. So when the distributor gets involved, they want me to make a buck on a game while they make 30. And I can sell one on my Shopify site. I don't use Amazon. I'll mention why, but I use one on Shopify, sell one game on Shopify, and I make what would be 40 games I would have to sell through a distributor. Now, what's the value of a distributor? It's their reach. They are going to promise you volume. But I've never been able to keep the game in stock. So I go through a printing every single year, and the game runs out almost every single year. So I don't need that reach. And you might say, well, why not make more? Well, I don't think there's a market for it that vast of an audience. It's not.
Sure.
It's not a type of genre that really sort of hits the sweet spot in our hobby. Our hobby loves the mythology and the dwarves and the post-apocalyptic and all the roots that come from that place I came from. And so this is a niche.
Yeah.
And I want to stay engaged with the niche. The reason I don't use Amazon, they blind everything. If you order off of Amazon, I have no access to you as a human being. They mask your email, and if I make any attempt to use the portal through which they'll pass me to you to have a conversation, to redirect you to resources or customer service support, they will suspend your account. And there's no people behind Amazon. Amazon, I assume in 10 years, it's going to be all AI anyway, but Amazon is just a monolithic monster. We love it on the commercial end, but I tell you what, if you're on the selling end, the only time Amazon, I think, makes sense is when you're more of a commodity and you need the reach. I had no drop off when I went from Amazon to my Shopify site. No drop. You know why? Because if you want the game, you're going to find it.
Yeah.
Right. And so the people who are interested in this game are smart enough to get to it and find it, because you search Obsession board game, it all pops right up top. It's right there. So Amazon isn't necessary. Plus, you cannot control how Amazon ships a product. And these are collector's items that we have. You got a Ship Shape Gamer insert. You don't want a box that's all mashed up. I've ordered games from Amazon that come in a bag and all four corners are dented in. And I promise to replace those if that happens, because you can't get something with dented corners. The only way to deal with that with Amazon is to box it yourself and then make that the product that they ship, not the game, but the game in a secure box. And that's really expensive. So I use Quartermaster Logistics, who is really good in protecting games.
Yeah.
Costs me a little more, but it works so much better.
Well, I'll have our friend reach back out to you and see how they can set that up, because I think you're spot on a couple of areas there. I mean, obviously it is a niche audience, but it fits that aesthetic that my wife and I both like, which is games that are not those themes, because that's not her thing.
Right.
I play D&D and other things, but that's not her area. And also, it's a game that you don't have to be mean to each other to win. You're playing your own game. Although you can be mean if you use some of your.
It can be
correctly.
Just a little bit of mean, but boy, some people scream about that little bit of mean.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I appreciate you kind of sharing that, because, it's interesting because you're really the first game designer we've talked to that handles everything, the distribution and the design. I mean, all of it. I mean, so it's just kind of interesting to get that cottage industry perspective.
Yeah, and one of the things that enables me to sort of break the rules is because when I do sell on Shopify, I don't have a middleman that's taken out a piece of the pie. Now, I've been very lucky. I worked 33 years for Medtronic and artificial hearts and artificial lungs. That was a lot of OR time, a lot of stress, and this is just great fun. So I don't need to take, but I take people out to dinner and I take a few bucks so the IRS doesn't think I got some sort of money laundering operation. But I don't need to pay Lilo over here. You're
paying Lilo, all right.
Yeah. But I can just sink it back into like the artwork coming up and some expansions and things of that nature.
Awesome. So my question. Going back toward to the game itself and just bigger picture kind of stuff. So I have a couple of questions, but I'll start, I guess, with this one. So I've not played the game. Joe's been the big evangelist for this, and then listening and reading a bunch of other stuff. And it seems like narrative was kind of a focus for how this was going to be unfolding for you, right? So was that something that you liked in games as well? And I think that we're talking to you about, getting involved in tabletop gaming again, like 2013, last 10 years or so. So were you drawn to narrative to begin with, or, you're reading these novels and shows in response to your wife? And did that inform the interest in narrative as you're building this game? Yeah,
I mean, no question. I like a great theme. I mean, I identify what I like in board games very unscientifically by calling, does it have magic when it hits the table? Do I get that feeling?
Oh, yeah.
It can be strictly mechanical, but that's going to be a harder sell. But like, I remember playing Terra Mystica, and we always used pool tables when we would go to the Atlantic shore with our family for vacations as gaming tables. They work really good as backup gaming. You can even put your drink in the pocket. But but when you spread out the game and it's got that certain feel, you spread out, Arc Nova, it's got that certain feel, or Barrage, it transports you a little bit. Doesn't mean I don't like somewhat abstract games in the right setting, but for the application of trying to interest people, in this case, my wife and my sister-in-law, my daughter, in games that they just instinctually reject sort of the core themes of the hobby. Mm-hmm. I figured the theme had to be strong. It had to be something that grabbed them. And so that was one of the things that I stuck with, is that every mechanic, every component had to be integrated with the theme. So if you want money in the game and you're going to trade reputation, well, there's a thematic justification. You're supposed to be financially independent as an aristocratic family. And if you got to go to London and borrow money the grapevine is real productive back 150 years ago in England, and people are going to find out, and it's going to hurt your reputation. And so those types of things reinforce the theme. And when I first designed it, I had too much theme in. I had all these events that happened in each round where people died, houses burned down, somebody was a coward in the war and they got shamed. And I got into too much. And that's where I got to give credit to Rado, because Rado, out of the blue, agreed in that era before reviewing became pretty sort of monetized. He just agreed on the theme to give it a try. Nice. Because he and his wife, Jen, liked thematic games, and that was their synergy there. And he told me, he played the first thing, and he said, "You really want me to write a review on this? You're not going to like it, or do a review. You're not going to like it." And I said, "No, that's okay. Don't do that." I said, tell me what we need to get rid of, and it was the bloat. Yeah. And so everything went away but what you see, which was just the core mechanic of coordinating the servants with the reputation, with the people who would only be seen at your estate at a certain level of reputation, with activities that you would only be able to host if you had a certain reputation. So that little dance is the core, and then get rid of everything else. And that's sort of what drove the game.
And it really balances the game too, because the families are so different in those starting points. And, we have families that we like to play, but we've also kind of shifted around because we wanted to see how all the families did play. The one thing we haven't done is play with more than just the two of us. Well, that's not true. We did have a 3-player game with our daughter once, but what we really want to do is get all the families on the table together and see what that's like.
And that's a good idea. I would only counsel the very brave to go over 4. They demanded in that Kickstarter in 2020, they wanted, can you do 5 players? Can you do 6 players? Believe it or not, there's some people who play 6 players. And just by the nature of this is a game that is a little bit multiplayer solitaire. The expansion is going to start to nibble at that a little bit. But as it stands now, you do have some downtime. Now, I can play with 2 other people that I've played hundreds of games with. And our turn's done when it gets to our turn. It's set up. So you go bump, 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 bump. You just fire around the table. Now, that's more of a mechanical take on the game. We're not using some of the funny stories that come out of the game, which are a lot of people like. Yeah. But I have to constantly play test new expansions and new ideas. And so it is more of a mechanical exercise when I do that, and we can go quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing how the play test or just the interaction with other folks can enhance the game. I think Jamie talked a little bit about that when he was on a few episodes ago with Wingspan, saying when he first saw it, it looked nothing like the game that they ended up producing in terms of some of the mechanics. And I think what you just described with Rado, kind of helping you sort of simplify the mechanic to make it a balanced game from at least my perspective. I think that's a really cool story. And that's what I love about this community, is that, there is this sense of helping and suggesting, and that people really want you to see a cool game happen. I know James, you've been a book editor for a long time. It's probably a very similar situation that you've been through.
Yeah.
As a publisher.
Yeah. 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 And it's fun to watch. It's interesting. It's amazing to watch people develop and keep iterating and finding the best version of itself. Yeah. And so another question I have for you. So going back to, I read, again, you were starting, Dan, like 2013, seeing games. It was like Dominion and Seven Wonders. It kind of came into your life all of a sudden. And clearly they got into your head, your heart, I guess. And I'm just, I like to ask this kind of question. Why? What's interesting to you about games? What captures you? Now you're running your own whole game soup to nuts kind of experience. What's fun for you? What's interesting to you about this?
So
That's awesome.
Believe it or not, this will actually make the podcast more interesting than I am, because the people that follow this cat. My daughter says I should start an Instagram page, because I gotta get on. No, I'm not doing it. I have an Instagram page, but I'm not going to monetize my cat. Anyway, I have very strong feelings in that regard, which
Awesome.
Without diving deep, I'm a man of faith, and I feel that there's a real threat to families, in that technology is taking away the social interaction in families. I look at the way I grew up. You gentlemen look at the way you grew up. Whoop, sorry. That's an alarm. It's not the alarm I should have set to be on time. That was an alarm. But, we grew up in a very organic, make your own fun.
Right.
You interacted with people, and the babysitting power of technology. I fought it with 3 kids. Sure. Put the phone down, go outside and play. I'm
going to lock you out of the house until the lights come on. Yeah. Until
the lights come on. Remember that commercial when long time ago they would broadcast to our parents at 11 p.m. Do you know where your kids are?
Right.
Because they would kick us out, and you'd come back in at the end of the day at night. But so I was probably a little more draconian than most parents. I didn't allow video games when that was the rage until they were teenagers. But I, of course, was dumb enough not to realize they just ran down to Joey's house down the street. And they anyway, but so when I got those games about maybe 11, 12 years ago now, my kids were like 10, 12, and 14, and they would fight to get to the table. We have 5 in our family. Most things play at 4, not Dominion is 7 Wonders. So those played well, but we picked up a lot of others, and, they would fight to get to the table. And I had a rule, you don't ever bring a phone to the table. So that was built in. And so we would play for, hours and hours on vacations, on Sunday. And I just said to myself, what's in this? There's laughter, imagination, exercising your brain power. When you get snow on the roof, you better keep exercising your brain or you're going to lose it. Looking people in the eye, it's everything good in life is sitting right there at the table, rather than babysitting our minds on Netflix or kids, staring at TikTok or whatever it was back then. And I was blown away about how effective that was. And I quickly started evangelizing before I made a game. And I got my cousins, a very close family, lives not far from me. I got everybody on board there. Today, anytime I go anywhere, they expect me to bring a full load of games, a full roster. I'm like you, I can memorize the rules to lots of games, so that we don't have the dreaded looking through the rule book when people are. To me, that's like the number one killer in evangelizing. 100%. And so it's that real living that's in a game. It's real living that's in a game. This, I call it my vocation, and it seems like, you make board games or promote board games for a vocation, but it's not that. It's what's behind the board game. The board game is mesmerizing to a lot of people, but the biggest hurdle to our hobby is the complexity. Right. And so there has to be evangelists that go out and make that first experience intoxicating, so that people want to get on board. So that's why I retired at 59 last year. And I said, I'd rather do this. I've been lucky enough that I could do that, and I'd rather do this. And I have a lot more fun and a lot less stress.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It's funny that you unpack it that way, because, James and I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm a member of a church that my wife and I have been members of for 30 years, and the pandemic just really, put a damper on how people do fellowship. And one of the things that we've been looking at is that, number one, you got to get out of the building and you got to go where other people are. And so one of the things that I've been talking about is a board game group that just gets together at the game store. And it's a way to introduce them to different games. And it doesn't even have to be a game, anything other than you're just there to share fellowship, because exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Sitting, we lost that ability, not ability. I think we just lost that tradition of getting face to face. I mean, James was talking earlier before you were able to join us about a game night that he did last night.
Yeah, last night had a bunch of colleagues and friends, people from the neighborhood, people who'd never met each other. This is the first time, and we had a great time. People talking across, generations, and we had engineers talking to, foreign language professors. It was wonderful. Yeah, but it was.
I'm curious, what'd you pick for that?
So I had 3 tables going. So my wife taught Cascadia, I taught Century Golem Edition, and I was sitting down and teaching and playing Concordia, the
Great.
2013, just the regular straight out Concordia.
That's great. Those are 3 winners. Those all have
Yeah.
a little bit of depth, which is pretty good for, I don't think you can see my shelves totally behind me, but I'll go as light as, play a game of Skull or just one, just to sort
Skull
of
is
get
great,
the toes
yeah.
in the water. And then you start adding to it until pretty soon. One of the philosophies was Obsession was the couples playing, like Joe, you and your wife, and that not a ton of guys love romantic literature and Victorian literature. But if I made it crunchy for them and I made it thematic for the partner, then both have something that engages them. And it's surprising how that worked, because it relied on the fact that the non-board gamer who probably would swear that they would never get into the games because they're too complicated they'll crawl over the hot coals to get to a place they want to be if the hot coals are the mechanic. And that's cool. And that's something like Cascadia, it's so beautiful and it's so thematic and fun. People don't realize just how much you got to burn the brain in order to get those combos.
Oh yeah.
And it's that publisher is so thematic too, because they always have a Beth Sobel cover rather, the artist, and we sort of talked a little bit about art at the beginning of this. I know I sound like I'm dropping Jamie's name over and over again, and I apologize for that, because we're really not that close. But when he was on, he talked about the book. We talked about the old, you judge a book by its cover, and why my wife never wanted to play Scythe because of the cover. And it was because of that we finally cracked it open and played it and realized, it's not what it seems. And I think, to a degree, I could see Obsession kind of working in the opposite way, the way you just described. And for some, but once you get into it and realize the satisfaction of, if you like cards, it's there. If you like worker placement, it's there. If you like the theme, it's there. If you like the how to be competitive and how to build the wealth, it's there. It's all there. And there are things that we see in other games, but it's in a way that, even if you play a game like some of the ones you might see from Vita Lacerda that's got a lot of complexity to it, it can scratch that itch without that level of complexity, I guess, is what I've observed in the game.
And Jamie's a gentleman. I've had interactions with him. He was looking at doing a promo that involved Obsession, but in addition, he was very complimentary, and he's a good guy. I mean, there's some people that criticize sometimes when games are heavily produced or overproduced. I'm not necessarily one of those. I mean, I find that can lead to that magical presence on a table.
Mm-hmm.
If you take Scythe and you had for your mechs, you had chits.
Yeah,
that's a different experience. Mm-hmm. And so there is a sweet spot. Like I backed Foundations of Rome, which I'm waiting on, which is probably too much bloat. One of the advantages of having a gaming company is every game I buy is research and development. Don't show the IRS it. It actually is true, because that's where you get ideas. That's where you get the ideas from. But I just bought for $115 at Gen Con the Expeditions expansion for Scythe with the metal mechs.
Yep.
Wow.
And so yeah, it fits an itch. The game's got to be good underneath.
Yeah.
But it fits an itch, and if you can combine both of them, that's a great thing.
Yeah, I think that it's that's what I love about the different designers and the different takes on the game. And there's certain things that I can just look at and know I'm going to like, but there are also certain games that I kind of look at initially and they intimidate me a little bit. And I would admit that Obsession initially fell into that category because we got it. And we talk a lot about the shrink wrap shelf of shame here. And it sat there, honestly, for a little bit before we said, nope, it's time. We got to pull it out. And that's when we pulled up the Teffy video. And it was really the first game for my wife and I, her name is Dale, by the way, for Dale and I to really say, you know what? We don't need a Rodney Smith video. We are going to get the gist of it. We are going to get into the book and we're going to figure this thing out. And the first time we did the playthrough, I'm sure we made some mistakes. And then we built on it, and then we built on it, and then we'll just leave it on the table. I mean, we have a big, like 24-inch Lazy Susan that I put the game board on so that we can kind of share forth on where we are. And we have the cards up there so that we can do what we need to do. You did provide Martin Wallace a little bit of money as I had to find a copy of Nanny Narking just to get the coins to use. I have still not opened up my copy of Nanny Narking, but I do have the coins that we used inside Obsession, and that's the only reason I got it. But that's the thing. We'll leave it out on the table. We have the bank set up. We're all just ready to go, and we use those coins for a lot of other games as well. But it was just so satisfying to just have it in that vein for us in terms of people passionate about games, taking responsibility for learning the rules and recognizing the mechanics that we like from other games. And now we find it a lot easier to just dig into a game that may look intimidating, and it really started with a game like Obsession to try to get that muscle memory.
And I did you and Dale no favors, because the bloat of my rule books probably rivals the bloat of Foundations of Rome in their actual buildings. I am a creative writer. I am not a technical writer. And James, you'll appreciate this. So I located a rule book editor writer who is doing all my rule books in the future and will redo all the rule books for Obsession. Like Jamie did with Scythe, he put out a spiral bound sort of consolidation of Scythe and all its expansions. And it's just it's stunning. I remember, I went through some self-published books and I had an editor, and, I'd be just appalled at what she did to my silly little books. But there was some great book, and I can't remember who it was by, a famous book, but somebody saved from back in the 1930s, the first page of this iconic book, which started off in a way that we would all recognize, with the editor's red pen markups on the original author's work. And it looked like a failed 11th grade English assignment. The guy moved everything around to get, call me Ishmael or what. We're not talking about, but whatever the iconic flow was, it didn't come out of the pen of the writer. Nope. It came out of the pen of the editor. And the writer had the idea and the editor made it sing. And so I'm working with a guy that he sends me back everything slashed, and it's just wonderful. I'm so glad that I'm at a point where I can now delegate that type of activity to a genius. It's a good thing.
I mean, this is the thing, because I teach writing. And this is the thing that students are always afraid of. They're like, oh, somebody's going to, or then authors later like, oh, you're going to do terrible things like that. But as your editor, that's the flip side, is that I'm there to make it be as good and as polished as it can. And I'm trying to see past all this other stuff to say, here's, where the real good, here's where the magic is happening. Go there, and encourage you to do that. And it's easy, I think, when you're an author to keep adding and think, no, it needs a little more. And so it's the editorial job to cut back and say, yeah, but you've given me this lump. Let's help find, what's in the center of it that really has the shape that you need.
Yeah.
Yep.
I read a book on writing by Stephen King.
Oh yeah.
And his one comment that sticks to me to this day is that you have to kill your children.
Right.
Which is that the children of your mind become so dear to you. You just don't want to part with them. And really, Rado, like, you're a literary editor, he's like a game editor. He's played enough of them that he knew there were children that had to die, which was all my various events that were overlaid over the top. And I had a heart attack, took them out, and it sure enough, there was something underneath. So yeah, it's important to be efficient in your design. Like, I look at a game like Hansa Teutonica.
Yeah.
There's just a few simple rules.
Yep.
And there's so much there's so many games like that.
Well, at Concordia last night was like that. All you do on your turn is you play a card. That's it. You just play a card and do what it says. But you have to keep all of them in mind. And then how are you going to chain them up? And what are you going to do? And how are you going to do that faster and more efficiently than the other person? But the rules, very clear, very simple.
Yeah. Right. If you got to write rules that deal with exceptions, which I have to do heavily for thematic reasons. But if you write rules and you start making exceptions, you need to tweak your rule if you can.
Yeah. Then your fantasy flight is what it is. Yeah.
There's an anecdotal story in literature that says that Anne Rice conceived of the book The Vampire Lestat, but then had to write the interview with the vampire first to set it up. And I don't know if that's true. I've just heard that. But it makes me think about this particular game. And I think about Frank West and his whole City of Kings things, where everything exists in the same universe. And the fact that you've got this robust backstory that maybe you had to cut from the base game, that's still in your mind. And I'm sure that still informs any type of expansion that you have in mind. And it's, you talked about in that universe. Well, all of that is in that universe. And so to me, that's what just sort of makes it even more compelling about the things that you took out, that, just knowing that they could potentially be there in some iteration is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah.
And you have to work through, this is true of writing as well, right? You have to work through to figure out where that core is, right? You have to do it, start bolting stuff on, and then go back and look at it and say, okay, all right, what can come off now, and see where it's because I imagine that watching a game develop is like watching a book develop, where you start off thinking you have an idea, and writers and editors will say things like, the book will teach you where it wants to go. And it sounds bizarre if you haven't done it, but it does. And I imagine that games, and that happens there too.
It does. Stephen King was one famous for saying he never wrote a plot more than he could fit on a napkin. And the book wrote itself. And that's key. I remember trying to write a long time ago and try pages and pages of plots and subplots. It just doesn't work that way. The story will actually surprise you with where it directs you. So I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And it sounds like the game has so many characters that the chances of them coming back together and sort of rubbing shoulders and elbows and trying to get into space, into each other's spaces, that there's just so much opportunity to explore.
Yeah, they're all individual characters. It's like Bruges, one of my favorite games. You got that massive stack and everybody's different. I sort of, when I designed Obsession, you sort of steal. There's no designer course. You say, I like this, I don't like that, and you put it in you put it in the game. And so I originally made Obsession like Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which is my favorite game.
Right.
And where you were actually going to build the manor out with actually tiles, and that was way above my IQ level. So I had to scrap it and go with just squares.
Well, I know, and the way you deployed that though is just so brilliant. I mean, we love that makeup. It does get frustrating with the reputation, but that's on us as the gamers. But I also like the fact that if you put your pinpoint in 1862 of Victorian England, I mean, technically you've got the whole world to draw from.
Yeah.
In that experience.
Yeah.
That was at the
and
height.
it was a fascinating. You're so right. It's a fascinating time because the big problem presented to the families at the start of the game is that they have manor houses that are 20, 25, 30,000 square feet. And every one of those rooms needed a fire every morning. Every one of those rooms need candles lit. The lady of the house is probably going to want flowers in most of those rooms, fresh cut or something. And what happened is that the Industrial Revolution siphoned off the tenant renters that were on the land that was owned by the estate. And they, it was a pretty subsistence form of living.
Sure.
And so they migrated to the cities. And so in Derbyshire, they went to Derby. And so now your rents go down, your expenses are no less, probably even going up as the standard of living started to rise from the Industrial Revolution. And they had to physically close off wings and portions of their manor house. And that's where we start at. When we talk about an improvement, we're talking about a place that's been boarded up for 35, 40 years and everything's draped in there. And they've got to get it open and they've got to clean it and they've got to update the furniture and they've got to, maybe they want a music room and they got to figure, they got to buy a baby grand. And so all this improving you're doing is you came into enough money to reverse the trend that was really grinding down the aristocratic country life until its disappearance 60 years later. And so that's the start point of the game, is that reality that took place in the 1860s, where, with the meat of the Industrial Revolution changing everything.
See, this is why having the cat's a good idea. You want a cat to go into that room first and get rid of everything that's, let's see it. It's awesome.
Let them hunt. But
yeah.
I can't recall seeing too many cats in the literature. It's mostly the man of the house has got a dog, or you're on a hunt, you got a kennels, you're doing. So I sort of lose that argument, except that I controlled the microphone, so I won the argument.
There you go.
Well, one of our favorite plays is Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, and I think you need an Ernest or a Bunbury type of character that would be the one that would go into the town and be the playboy and come back and be back in the village and at the manor and be normal. I think that could be fun.
Well, you do have those unsavory guests, the cats.
That's fair. That is fair.
And
I'm just wondering if Oscar Wilde's now out of the public domain and you could pull a Bunbury.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be awesome. So I'm not going to pander to you and say, gee, how do I become a play tester? Because I'd love to do that for you. But I'm more curious about, as an independent designer who's done a couple of Kickstarters, we've talked in the past about the anatomy of a Kickstarter. How is that whole process A, coming together for you, and B, now that this is your second or third one, do you find it's a little bit easier to go through?
It's easier to go through. You understand the pitfalls. I mean, I made every conceivable mistake in the first one.
Including, if I remember from an interview, that it was an ugly looking game, right?
That is very true. And we talked about the collegiality of our hobby. There were people that were fascinated by the theme. They were smart enough to see the mechanical flow, but I was not it was an ugly game. I had no graphic design skills. I taught everything self-taught. Again, it was a boutique game. I wasn't really even thinking in that direction, and everybody pitched in. I mean, I sulked for a day or two when they comments said, "Yeah, it's a pretty neat idea, but it's really ugly." Really, And then after sulking, I said to myself, "Well, in crowdfunding, the whole point is you're supposed to listen to the people that are going to give you the advantage of getting some money ahead of time in order for you to make a vision come true. You better listen to them. And so I waded in and I said, help me redesign the game during this Kickstarter. And that month, I think I slept probably an average of 2-3 hours a night because I took the feedback, I redesigned things, and what you have, Joe, is what came out of that Kickstarter. If you go back to that Kickstarter page and look at the very bottom, you'll see the contents page that shows the original art. It's horrifying. Right. It really is horrifying. But so that's what you shouldn't do in a Kickstarter is redesign the game. I mean, the biggest problem with a Kickstarter is the logistics. Anybody who's in the creative mode thinks that it's, like an editor in a book, they have a manuscript and they can just, okay, and now magically it's a book. There's a whole lot of logistics between A and B. And more so with the Kickstarter, because if you're going to make any volume of games, you're going to make them in China. Right. Now, people will say, well, you shouldn't, you should try to find other markets, but there are no other markets because even if you go to an American or a German company, they're going to turn around and they're going to go to China for a great percentage of their sub-manufacturing that fills the game that they put their label on, being coming out of Dusseldorf or coming out of San Francisco. And so there's obviously there's some costs associated with that intermediary. So getting things from China to all the various ports, again, I thought a boutique game, it didn't turn out to be. And in 2020, one thing I will give myself credit for, I don't give myself credit for a lot of things that people sort of walk me by the nose, but I fulfilled my 2020 Kickstarter on time during COVID.
Sweet. Amazing.
2020. And I was vacationing in Tybee Island.
Oh, yeah.
In 2020, and I was lying on the beach. And I had my iPad that I'm using here that my cat keeps bumping. I had my iPad and I was tracking. You can do vessel tracking. Yep. And I look down and I look up and my freighter is right out there.
That's awesome.
Where it's been sitting, and it sat for 13 days because the ports were backed up. I even had a game company in Savannah that said, I'm going to row a boat out there and get my order that I'm waiting on because I want it. But the logistics are what trip you up in a Kickstarter. Yep. Logistics are the problem. You got to know what your shipping's going to be. You're going to take a bath. I took a bath on my shipping in one of my Kickstarters. But again, I have a little bit of a favorable cost structure, so I survived that. But then you have my container, which cost me $6,000 in 2019, cost me $35,000 for two of them in 2020.
Wow!
Because of just the shortage. India was the main manufacturer of containers, and they had COVID shutdowns and things, and so you can't overpromise and underdeliver. People are getting really jaded on Kickstarters. I'm waiting on a game it's approaching its 4th or 5th year from What's Your Game? Madeira. I think I backed it in 2018, maybe 2019. I'd have to check. Wow. What's Your Game is not a small company, and they still haven't fulfilled.
Well, I've been complaining about an Indiegogo that I backed that's a nestable chess set that is still not arrived.
Yeah. So one thing you got to do is you have to have your artwork ready to go when you will go into the Kickstarter. If you are going to wait to do your pre-press, which is the interaction with the printers and their representatives that you deal with back at Panda Games, who I use, if you're going to wait to start that process to see if you get backing, you're going to add 3, 4, 5 months to your Kickstarter. You need to have your artwork ready to go so that if I'm changing a few things, I've checked my blacks. I know that I have a pure black and not a rich black, and all the blacks that I have. I know I'm overprinting things so that I don't get a ghosting image and get rejected by the printer. And I know my card counts, what sheets they fit on. I know the materials I'm using. I know what's thick. You have that all done ahead of time. Then you can actually maybe spend only a month fine tuning and then get to print. And most people, I met a guy at Gen Con who said, hey, can you give me some advice? And he had a game, looked really good. He hadn't done anything with his artwork. He literally had all prototypes. He hadn't even decided, is it going to be an InDesign file? Is it going to be an Illustrator file? How am I going to do that? My stuff is pre-press checked before I start. And it wasn't in the first one. I learned this in the first one, but I pivoted pretty quick because I was redesigning during the game, and I had to validate some of those designs in that month with my printer and my pre-press people. And so I got a jump start, and it dawned on me, and that's what the professionals do. They anticipate this.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And it's because, I look at, the number of established publishers, like the bigger organizations that will do a Kickstarter largely just to shore up pre-orders. And it kind of makes me wonder, you were talking about what you have to be now to get into Kickstarter. And I think what you originally went through is exactly what Kickstarter had in mind, to kind of have that kind of community support. But because it's become such an on-ramp to guaranteed pre-sales,
it's a real problem. The oxygen has been sucked out of Kickstarter and GameFound by established companies using it. As I say, when people who are new who want advice on Kickstarter, I say Kickstarter's number one is marketing, not funding. Right. Number one is marketing. If you're putting out a funding target that's close to where you think you're going to finish, or even 2/3 the way of where you're going to finish in your actual crowdfunding, you got a problem, because you're relying too much on the funding from the community. I know that's ostensibly the reason that we do crowdfunding, but you really do crowdfunding to test the viability of an idea on a global scale. Sure. How else are you going to do that? You do it under the auspices of wanting funding. But heck, if you were to do a Kickstarter right now for a game that you just drew up, if the game was great, you guys would chip your money in and be able to get from A to B to get this thing going. The real question is does it have a market? Is it any good? Once you answer that question, funding really becomes a secondary issue. But the problem with all these big companies, established companies, constantly using, there's only so many dollars that are going to be in the crowdfunding market. And when I look, like Castles of Mad King Ludwig, where do I have that somewhere? I don't know where it is. It's somewhere up there in a place of honor. But I backed the Colossal thing in a microsecond. It's my favorite game. Now, I love Bezier games. They're good friends of mine. Right. But when you're buying a $300 Castles, tricked out, loaded with everything you can possibly put into it, that's dollars that a normal person, I'm not normal because I got a company I can cheat with, but a normal person, that's dollars that maybe wouldn't go to 2-3 people who are trying to get something launched. Right. And so I do think it's a problem. I don't know how it's a problem you solve, but I think there's a lot of people that might have got past over the finish line that don't have that freedom anymore, because there's just people aren't going to take that kind of gamble.
Well, I even look at my own Kickstarter habit, which I have a bad one. But I've noticed that I've gotten a lot more selective, not so much because of what you described. I mean, I backed the same reprint that you did. I did not get the Colossal, but I did get the set that came with all the pieces and right. That game as well. Although my wife has some issues about one component that if we ever get the folks from Bezier on here, we're going to talk about. Anyway, it's one of those things now where it's like, James and I always kind of talk about what we're intrigued by and what we back. And normally I would just back a game because of the publisher. Keymaster Games has got one right out now called The Harvest. And I'm a fan of Parks. I looked at it. I didn't back it. and it only because it just didn't speak to me the way Parks did. And I'm getting a little bit more selective because, quite frankly, I'm running out of room on my shelving in here. Uh, but it's also about, I think to a degree the Kickstarter thing kind of creates this sense of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Well, if I don't get the Kickstarter version, I'm going to miss the cute dragons that came with Flamecraft that I'm not going to get if I buy the retail version, or, but the more cynical side of me says, no, if there's a market for that, somebody's going to say, okay, Kickstarter's been over for a year. Let's put that out. There's a reason why I can walk into Atomic Empire in Durham, North Carolina, and there are the Isle of Cats internet expansion packs that you can buy, because eventually that hits the market.
Right.
The first
one. And that's one reason I never do a Kickstarter version. I do a version of the game. The benefit is the community that likes this particular theme and pretty significant economic discounts. It's not for stuff that's not going to show up later. And I get that question all the time. Is this the Kickstarter version? I say it is, because there's no other version.
Right. That makes sense.
Like if I didn't put the boxes in the retail version and I put them in the Kickstarter version, that just makes people angry at you.
Yes.
Right. And then if you suddenly say, well, I better make the boxes, and then you're charging $12 for the boxes that go in the game, then you look like you were being mercenary from the get-go. Just make the game. And if you want to give the Kickstarters a benefit, see, I do it Kickstarters here, the lowest I can possibly go. And then the pre-orders go here and the retails there. Those are the three prices. Pick your poison. You can have whatever you want. But that's I think that's the way I do it.
Well, Dan, I just want to say how much, obviously we appreciate you being on the show today, and obviously how much I appreciate your game. Or I got to get James to learn it. Maybe James, that can be a game that we can try to demo at Mythicon.
Mythicon, that'd be awesome.
Put that on the table and expose that to more people here in the Charlotte area. And then, gosh, Dan, when you get the next Kickstarter launch, we would love to have you back on and just sort of see how that's going, and just sort of see what the next evolution is in the Obsession game. And I just wish you all the best as you continue to bring this hobby as a profession in your next stage of your life.
Well, I appreciate that much. I will mention right now the Kickstarter is scheduled for October 17th through 31st.
Okay.
I think that I've learned that you do a month-long Kickstarter, you just provide an opportunity for a malaise to set in the middle. It's very much a curve like this, where you get your pledges at the beginning and the end. And so I'll have plenty of pre-orders if somebody's upset that they're going to miss it. But I've got enough of a community that the community people are going to be aware of it in spades.
Right.
Another thing I do not do, and I just want to throw this out there because that question gets asked a lot. I will not be selling anything that's available in retail in the Kickstarter.
Okay.
I think that's unethical. I think it's a disservice to the people who have invested in inventory. Like if game theory guy, let's say in Raleigh, and he's got 20 games, and then I'm selling them at a discount over top of him to people in North Carolina. That's I've got to respect that relationship. So it's just the expansion and the metal coins. Nanny Narking no longer makes those coins.
I know.
And so there's a need for those. You could probably sell them on the internet for $200. So there's a need for those. So it's just those two components.
Nice.
Keeping it very simple. And so I did want to mention that because people
Awesome.
A lot of times will say, well, I'll just wait and get everything in a bundle. But no, and then I got to consider that there's French, German, Spanish, Polish, Italian, Chinese, and Korean that are coming out all next month. They're on ships now. So it's Spiel des Jahres, the German publisher, is going to be featuring that.
Oh, nice.
But there's a lot of bilingual players all over the world. And if they can get a bundle from me and say, well, I'm going to just be playing solo, I'll just get it from him. I don't need it in Korean. Strangely, Korea loves Obsession. Isn't that weird? I don't want to offend anybody, but I mean, from a standpoint, I don't have any interest in Japan. I had a little bit of interest in China. There's something about the aristocratic life that my good friends in Korea just adore. And it makes for a very interesting tiles, cards, and boxes. And I can't wait to get my foreign language boxes so I can put them up with my editions that are back there.
So you said it a minute ago, and it just blew past me. When does that Kickstarter kick off?
The 17th of October through the 31st.
17th. Okay, got it. I'm going to put it on my calendar right now because I will definitely want to be paying attention for that.
Awesome.
All right, I'm actually physically putting it on the calendar because if I don't, it'll get past me. I know me very well, so it's now there. That's awesome.
And in a 2-second nutshell, it adds some interaction with the players at the table. Not a ton, but some true worker placement. So really our workers now are not classic worker placement because you control them and you don't fight for a spot with somebody else. They're more action selection using a worker, where now there's going to be a central board edition that's going to allow you to compete for different spots out in the middle that'll help you solve some problems that crop up during the game. Like you mentioned, reputation. Sometimes you can get frustrated where you can't get your reputation or you got bad objectives. So there's ways now to sort of go, I call it to the hospital. You can go to the hospital and you can fix some of your problems, but you got to, there's a cost to it. So it's got some balance to it, but it's anyway.
Well, now I'm very intrigued.
Yeah.
So
there's a Facebook page and that there's a slow reveal going on now of all the components.
Okay. I will. I'm sure I'm probably tracking on that. I'll have to dig it up and take a look.
Yeah.
Well, James and I do this podcast typically every other week. We generally talk about what's on our table when we have a little bit of time. I'm looking forward to getting Obsession back out on the table because my wife was admonishing me this morning that we probably should have played it last week just to kind of refresh ourselves on it. But it's definitely going to come out, and I think I will. There's a game con here in Charlotte called Mythicon. It's the old Mace, if you're familiar with that. They're going to do it in November. And so that might be a good one to get on the table because it will be right after your Kickstarter ends and we can kind of teach some folks that as well. Well, so James, I don't know if you had any final thoughts or not.
This has been fantastic. I know we've got another cat here on the screens here. She's a much older girl here. Yeah, it's all cats all the time.
I have no cat.
My cat waves at your cat.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a grand cat that does have his own Instagram.
That's hilarious. No, this has just been a great conversation. Cats included, especially cats, perhaps.
So just for our listeners, this has been Lay It on the Table. Of course, you can find us at layitonthetable.show, where you can find your favorite podcast platform to listen to us on. We are on all of the major ones, including Apple Podcasts. And if you are so inclined, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us 5 stars and leave us a review, or leave us less stars and tell everybody what I got wrong, like Jane Austen versus the Victorian era. Happy to take that kind of constructive criticism. We are also part of a guild at Board Game Geek, and you can also find links to the show there at Board Game Geek. And then finally, you can find us on the Geek and Southern YouTube channel. All links below in the show notes, as well as any information on Obsession by Dan Halligan and that whole universe. We look forward to that coming out in 2024, the expansion that is. And as always, I am Joe Mahaffey. I am not bored. I am board gaming.
And I'm James Engelhart, hoping that all your tiebreakers break your way.
See you next time, everybody.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Bye.